this is the steering rack, and this is exactly how I took it out of the car. I haven't done anything to it. I will be completely rebuilding this, and it's quite a daunting task because it's quite complicated and I haven't done anything like this before. So we'll see how we get on. But we'll be completely rebuilding this, inspecting all the components to make sure that everything's okay, and I'm completely reassembling this again. Okay, so we'll start by disassembling everything. You need to start with removing the ball joint and the little rack extension. So this is the rack extension. We'll need to restore this. This is the ball joint. We're just going to replace this with a new one. Now we need to remove the little hose clips to remove the little gator. As you can see, it's all the grease that's in the bellows. You have to be careful when you take it off because it just squirts out. Okay, the hose clips off. You can remove the bellows. As you can see, it's completely filled with grease. So as you can see, this is the inner ball joint, and the next thing that we need to do is to bend these tabs on the stab washer so we can unscrew the inner ball joint. So that's loose, just unscrew it. Now you need to be careful because inside this you have the ball. And you have a little cup. Then you have a little spring and also a series of shims. Okay, I have them all. And you need to be super careful that you know what thickness these are. You have the tab washer. Now we need to unscrew this portion, and as you can see, the little lock nut on the inside has been brazed on, so we need to unscrew this from this. Okay, I can't get it off. I have the same problem on the other side that I did before because I cannot get this portion off. So I'll need to do a little bit of research to make sure that I have the correct method of removing this. Okay, so I finally got it off on the other side of the rack, and the way to do it is to unscrew the lock nut, which is loose on the other side of the rack. Screw it all the way against this spacer. This is the limiting stop, and this is the thing that changes this steering rack from a Heralds and Spitfire steering rack because it has less movement. So you have to unscrew it all the way. Then I can use your adjustable wrenches and put some force on it, and then you can unscrew it. So this is one of the pieces that need to come off. Now we have to unscrew the lock nut. The lock nut's off. Now we can remove the spacer. So we've removed everything from this side. So the two spacers, the lock nut, and this thing, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so because we've been able to remove this nut from the other side of the steering rack, we don't have to remove it from this side because this is braced on here anyway. So we'll have to slide out the rack from this side. Okay, so before we can remove the pinion, we need to remove this cap. I've already got it loose. I had to use my adjustable wrench and a hammer because it was really tight. Now inside here there should be a spring, as you can see. And also some shims on top. And this little pressure plate that puts the pressure on the rack. Okay, so I've cleaned out this little groove because it was filled with dirt. Now we have to remove the little stir clips. So this is the stir clips. Now the pinion is loose. So we've been able to slide out completely. You have to be careful because in the top bush there's very little locking pin. So now we can slide the bushes out, and there are of course shims in there. So now we can clean this off a little bit and make sure that we have everything, and then we can remove the rack. Because we removed the top part and the pinion, we can now slide out the rack. So this is the rack. And it's completely greasy, so this is normal. So we're going to degrease this and inspect this for damage. Now there's another bush in there that's below the pinion, so we can turn this around. We have to use a drift to tap it out. Okay, so this is one of the spacers that came out. There's also a big bush in there that should come out. And this is the big bush. Okay, so that's it. We've completely disassembled it. Now we can clean everything and inspect for wear. Today we're going to reassemble the steering rack. I have the housing here. It's completely painted, completely refurbished. The aluminium has been polished and clear coated. We have the rack. This has been cleaned, degreased and inspected. I've already installed one tie rod. So now we're going to install the rack into the housing. So we're going to start off by completely greasing this and then sliding it in. We're just going to take some grease. This is some lithium grease. So normally it would say that you wouldn't grease this, but you just add some pumps on the end cap, but that way you're not quite sure that all the grease has been divided equally. So now we're going to slide it in. There's a little bit of paper left in here, a bit of masking tape left. Okay. It's going in all the way. Okay. This is definitely enough grease because I could feel the pressure when I was putting it in, and a little oilite bushing on the end was scraping the grease off, so all the grease is being retained in the steering rack housing. Okay, when you move it a little bit, grease spreads out, and it's much easier to move now. So now we're going to install the pinion. So this is the pinion with all of the little bearings and bushes, and the pinion, of course. So we're going to grease up all these little parts so they stick together, and it's much easier to install. Okay, so we're going to take the pinion and we're going to grease all the parts. Little cap. Okay, so we're going to stick the little cap on the end. Okay, so now it sticks. Now I can slide this in. We'll go. Okay, this is my mistake. So we need to put these small bearing bushes in first, and then you can slide in the rack. So we're going to remove the rack. Okay, so now we're back on track. The bottom bush is in. And slide the rack back in. Slide the pinion back in. Okay. Now we're sure that it's meshed correctly. Just going to give it a love tap to seat the pinion. Okay. Now the pinion's fully seated. Now we should install the circlip. So now we can install the little follower. I'm going to grease this a little bit. Set the spring in here. A little bit of grease on these shims just to make them stick together. Like so. Need to put a little bit of grease in the gap. It's time to reassemble the reconditioned tie rod. So this is the tie rod, and now we're going to assemble the spacers and everything that we need on here. So these are the two spacers that go on the rack, and these are to limit the turns from lock to lock. We'll get a little bit of grease on here, as well as in the inside of the spacer. So this is quite tight, so we might need to tap it a little bit. So now we're going to put the lock nut on here. Okay, so now the lock nut's on. Now we're going to assemble the tie rod assembly before we're going to screw it on here. Okay, so now we have this assembly, but it's not completely tightened yet. I like to tighten it when it's on the rack. Take a little bit of grease for the spring, a little bit of grease in the end of the rack. Put the spring in. Now we'll screw this on. So now we'll tighten this. Normally it will tighten all the way until this middle nut is seated on the end of the rack. This middle nut is seated, and this one has been tightened as far as it will go. So now we'll tighten the lock nut so that's tightened, and then we'll tighten this again. So now we can fit the new bellows onto the rack. The manual says to fill the bellows with grease, so that's what we're going to do. Okay, so I've painted the tie rods until here, so we're going to slide the bellow over the little painted edge, like so. And we're going to tighten it. In this kit that I got, we had these tie wraps, and I'll use these for now, but I'm going to replace these with some stainless hose clamps. Okay, so they're tightened, but as you can see, everything's really greasy and it will slide around. So I'm hoping that it will stay on. So we've assembled the tie rod adapter to the tie rod. Now you can just... So this is one side assembled. We'll quickly do the other side, and then we're going to install it on the car. We've completely restored the steering rack, so now it's time to mount it to the chassis. We've also restored the aluminium rack mounts. I've put the wheels in tow out so that I have room to put the rack in, and then afterwards connect the wheels. So try to put it roughly in the correct position. Here you can see how the steering rack is mounted to the car. It's solidly mounted with the aluminium clamps to the chassis. I hope you enjoyed seeing my steering rack being restored. You can also visit my blog if you want to see some more in detail explanation and photographs. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you won't miss any of the upcoming videos. So I hope I see you then.